I'm here at the Edmonton Convention Center, where the first official Conservative Leaders Debate is scheduled to take place. We're going to see all 6 candidates debate this time around. Patrick Brown is joining his contenders. As you might remember, he wasn't there for the last debate, the unofficial debate on Friday. So this is going to be our first opportunity to see them all debate in English. Looking forward to it. Rachel Emanuel reporting for the Western Standard from Edmonton.
Canada as one of this country's most distinguished journalists. He's interviewed every prime minister since John Diefenbaker.
Please welcome Mr. Tom Clark.
Thanks very much, Rick and Diane, and good evening, Edmonton. How are you? Terrific. And in fact, good evening, Canada, because this event is being broadcast live right across the country by CPC and by CTV, so this is for everybody. I want to thank all of you to start off with, and of course the organizing committee, for inviting me to participate in what is going to be a very important evening. And frankly, I don't know who was more courageous, them or me, but anyway, here we are. This is going to be a very big night for Conservatives, obviously, for all of you in the room and Conservatives across the country, because you will have the opportunity to listen, to assess, and ultimately to judge who among these 6 candidates is the best one to lead the party into the future. I would also say that this is a very big night for Canadians everywhere in Canada, regardless of political stripe or affiliation, because good, healthy, informed, and yes, passionate debate is the very lifeblood of a good, healthy democracy. And therefore, everybody has a real stake in what happens on this stage tonight. So a couple of quick notes before we begin. I want to back up what Rick and Diane said. As they say in the theater business, please remain seated for the entire performance. No clapping, no booing, nothing. You know the consequences of what will happen if you do. But honestly, tonight, let's just leave the stage to these 6 people. I think that's the right way to go. I'm going to be calling a pretty tight game tonight. There is going to be no mushiness on time. We're going to keep to a tight schedule. And also, I'm going to be expecting some pretty clear answers to some pretty clear questions, and I hope you are expecting the same. Final quick note, there are 5 distinct parts of this debate, and as we begin each part, I will be reminding the candidates of what the rules are, what the format is, and what the timing is, and through them, you'll be hearing the same thing. So you'll know at the beginning of each segment exactly where we're going to go and what we're going to be doing. Buckle up, everybody. Now, please welcome your candidates for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. Okay. There we go. Good evening, candidates. Everybody well? I do believe this is my problem. I'll be right with you. There we go. Thank you so much. Okay. So good evening. To remind you of what we are going to do right off the top, as you know, we gave you, in a sense, a little assignment before you came here. You've been working on this, no doubt diligently, for a couple of days now. But what we asked you to do was to finish this sentence. My vision for Canada is. You will have 45 seconds in which to tell us what your vision is. And but there's a twist, and you know it. You can't mention any other candidate on the stage, and you can't mention any other federal leader. If you do, there's going to be trouble, and here's what you're going to hear. Now, I will then, after you've done your segment, I will engage you. You have 30 seconds to engage with me, and then we'll move on. The draw has been done, and we are going to start this debate with Mr. Scott Aitchison. Mr. Aitchison, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My vision for Canada is to renew the promise that the next generation will be better off than today's. High grocery bills, a housing crisis, inflation, all make life harder. Millions of Canadians are struggling to make ends meet, and a Liberal government does little more than make inflation worse. This divisive rhetoric leaves millions of Canadians feeling frustrated and even demonized by their own government. The answer to today's challenge is not to fan the flames of those frustrations and make Canadians more angry. Those politics of division have left you behind. You deserve leaders who care more about your success than our own. I seek to lead the Conservative Party and our team to form a government that delivers more than just photo ops, but real solutions to the challenges we face.
You're
Join
done.
me, and we will build that future together.
Thanks very much. Quick question to you. You were saying you want to take the politics of division out of the equation. How do you do that?
Repeat the question, please.
How do you take the politics of division out of the equation?
It's the divisive rhetoric that we need to take out of our discourse. And all parties are guilty of it. I'm going to give you the most obvious example, and I'm going to use the name of another party leader now because I think I'm allowed to. But if you look at the way the Prime Minister used vaccine mandates and actually divided Canadians by demonizing one group over another,
you know the rules,
that's wrong.
you just broke them. We're moving on.
Okay.
Roman Baber, your vision of Canada is?
Thank you. My name is Roman Baber. My vision for Canada is a return to being a credible democracy, that we don't censor people or speech, that we end 21st century segregation and let people make their own medical decisions, that we restore Canadian kindness and respect diversity of opinion. My vision for Canada is that we unleash our economic opportunity by making us a natural resources superpower. My vision for Canada is that we let Canadians work, love their families, and that government finally leave us alone. Thank you.
Quick question, and we're going to get into the debate, but Mr. Baby, you want Canada to become an energy superpower in the world. In 30 seconds, tell me, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I think that our natural resources are a blessing, and I'm not going to let oil and gas be canceled. And it's good for our strategic interests, for our economic bottom line, and it's also good for our planet, because Canadians can derive and clean and safe energy better than any other nation in the world. We need to work with our provinces. We can restore the right balance, but that is the way out of the economic mess that we're in. I'm going to turn Canada into a natural resources superpower.
Sorry, Patrick Brown. My vision of Canada is?
My vision of Canada includes a Conservative Party that builds a broad, multi-faith, multicultural coalition that can win. We've lost 3 elections in a row, and we've forgotten how to win in areas like suburban Canada, in the GTA where I get elected. We'll never win with a divisive leader who repels voters and doubles down on discriminatory policies that trample over the religious freedoms of Canadians. The choice before the party is clear. Do we want an unelectable party leader who drives voters away, walks straight into liberal traps, giving unclear answers on divisive issues like abortion, and wedges Conservatives against each other? Are we ready to win? I'm Mayor Patrick Brown, and I'm ready to win, and we need your help.
Now, I just want to remind the audience, you're all crossing a red line here, so you want to be careful. Just let me pick up, Patrick, you're talking about, like Mr. Aitchison did, the politics of division. You skated pretty close to mentioning the name of somebody on here, which you know was against the rules, so that's fine. But how do you take suburban Canada and make it conservative blue with the background that you've been talking about and the failures of the past?
You know, I look at suburban Canada, it's a mosaic of the country. And I truly believe, and I've shown, you can convince residents who have traditionally voted for other parties that their values are our values, conservative values. I've seen that in Brampton, I've seen that across the GTA. So it's really about building those relationships and telling our story, that we're the party that will fight to make sure we don't spend beyond our means, balance budgets, and fight for every Canadian. And that's key. We need to send a message. We'll fight for every Canadian, no matter their walk of life.
Thank you very much. Mr. Polyev, your vision of Canada
is one where you, the citizens, are masters and your government is servant. It is one where people have the freedom to take back control of their lives. That means freedom from inflation, so that hardworking single mothers can afford nutritious food for their kids. Freedom from inflation so that 32-year-olds don't have to live in their parents' basements, that they can actually afford their own homes. Freedom from inflation and carbon taxes that have made it unaffordable for working people to fill their trucks with gas. The freedom to speak without fear and censorship, and the freedom to make your own medical decisions. In other words, the freedom to be master of your own destiny and a captain of your own life. Thank you.
All right, folks, here's the deal. Supporters of any candidate, the time that you cheer is going to be taken away from your candidate. Just so you know, that's the way the deal works here. Mr. Polyev, you talked about inflation and freedom from inflation. How many years is it going to take you to bring inflation down to what, 1% or 0%?
Well, it's hard to say how high it will be when I take office, but there's no question that we have to hold those accountable who've caused it. You know, money printing government deficits have caused more dollars chasing fewer goods, driving higher prices, and the Bank of Canada governor has allowed himself to become the ATM machine of this government. And so I would replace him with a new governor who would reinstate our low inflation mandate, protect the purchasing power of our dollar, and honor the working people who earn those dollars.
Okay, I have a feeling we'll be getting back to that point you made in a minute. Dr. Leslyn Lewis, your vision.
My vision for Canada is to once again make Canada a beacon of hope and opportunity for all. A nation where we respect our charter and where our government never has the opportunity to freeze our bank accounts without a court order. National unity is at an all-time low. Many people have been traumatized by COVID lockdowns and government mandates. I'm running to be a bridge builder, to unite the party and to unite the country. Business owners will have the confidence to take chances again. We will develop our natural resources while protecting the environment without a carbon tax. We will respect freedoms and uphold our Charter of Rights. I'm running to make Canada one of the freest and most
Dr.
prosperous
Lewis, you're out of time. Let me quickly pick up on one thing that you said. You said that we have never been so divided, or national unity has never been so challenged. What are you basing that on?
If we look at the last 2 years, we have seen families torn apart by COVID. We see parents not talking to children. We've seen a government that has pit Canadians against each other. There are millions of people who cannot travel in their own country, people who are unemployed. The government has used COVID to divide Canadians, and it's time for us to heal.
Folks, I've really got to, I don't want to stop the debate, but we will, if necessary. You've been asked a number of times now, please don't do that. So I'm asking you once again, please don't do that, or your candidate will get penalized. Finally, Jean Charest, your vision of Canada is?
Well, thank you very much. And first, let me say how delighted I am to be here in Edmonton, Alberta, and to join with my fellow candidates on the stage. You're asking the fundamental question of this leadership campaign, and the reason I'm running is because I see a country that is deeply divided. And I am running because I believe that national unity is the #1 challenge of any prime minister in this country. That nothing big, nothing of substance gets done unless we're able to bridge the country between the East and the West. And that's what I've done all my life. It's what I fought for. And that's what the Conservative Party needs to be about in the next election campaign, to offer that national vision.
Let me just pick up on one thing that you said. You're talking about East and West. You know, in the battles gone by, it was always Quebec and is Quebec in or is Quebec out. How much of the East is about Quebec and that national unity piece is about Quebec?
It isn't just about one province. It can never be about just one province. It's about the whole country, Tom. And you know, on issues like energy, for example, whether it's oil, gas, or pipelines, or mining, we as a country need a national leader who is going to stand up for the resource industry. When have we ever heard the Prime Minister say, I believe in this project. I think it should happen. And yes, please, I'm delighted to name him if you want me to.
You heard that.
I did.
You broke the rules.
Well, and I did it
anyway.
deliberately. Thank you.
Okay. We're moving on to the second section of the debate now, and let me just quickly remind the candidates of what this is all about. We are asking you a series of rapid-fire questions on a number of policy issues, and we're looking for a yes or no. The question will be very clear. There will be no doubt about the yes or no answer, but there's also 15 seconds right away for you to expand a little bit or qualify your yes or no if you wish. You don't have to, but you can if you want to. Once everybody is answered, I will choose 2 of the candidates who perhaps have opposing views and query it a little bit more and let you talk a little bit. We will be moving on. The draw has been done for this as well. And I'm just looking for how much time you've got here. 15 seconds, then 30 seconds when we come back, when I pull the 2 people out. Okay. Rapid fire question. Here we go. And we're starting with Dr. Lewis, and then we'll work down the line from there. Dr. Lewis, the war in Ukraine, as we all know, has been an unspeakable tragedy, and it continues as we speak tonight. Carnage and destruction are unimaginable. Do you support creating a no-fly zone over Ukraine?
The attack on Ukraine should be taken seriously. We have to ensure that we do not exacerbate the tensions that are already there.
Is that a no?
Oh, that's right. No.
No, thank you very much. Moving on. Mr. Beber.
No. You know, my mother's family is from Ukraine. I'm heartbroken. We're witnessing a catastrophic loss of life and infrastructure. There needs to be a greater effort to end the conflict. Escalation will not get us out of it. The only way to end it is to bring the sides to a ceasefire.
Mr. Charest.
We could only do that if our NATO allies agreed. Canada can't do that alone. We all admit that. What we need to do in Ukraine is 3 things. Lethal weapons for Ukraine. That's what they need, and that's what Canada should do more of. More aid, and bringing Ukrainians who want to come to Canada here in this country so that they're secure.
I'm not sure whether that was a yes or a no.
It's a no. If our allies are not there, Tom, we can't do it.
Mr. Aitchison.
No, and I'll build on what Mr. Charest said. Part of the problem, of course, is that we've never met the 2% of our GDP in terms of military funding to meet our commitments to NATO. Canada's not a reliable partner in the world, and we need to do a lot better than we are.
Mr. Brown.
Yes, I believe Canada should push and actively advocate and be part of it to show that NATO is serious about these encroachments. We need to stand steadfast with our allies in Ukraine.
Mr. Poilievre.
No, but I believe we should provide more lethal weapons to our Ukrainian allies and offer refuge to Ukrainians who are fleeing. We also need to unleash Canadian energy production so that we can help break European dependence on Putin.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to go with Patrick Brown and Mr. Poilievre on this because you have opposing views. Mr. Brown, you said that we should encourage and participate in a no-fly zone over Ukraine. You, Mr. Poilievre, say no. So, Mr. Brown, let me ask you about the concerns that people have about escalating a war by doing such a thing as a no-fly zone, which would require offensive fire against, for example, radar stations and installations.
Well, I certainly don't believe we should abandon our allies. And, the pleas from Ukraine need more than promises and best wishes. We are seeing an encroachment in Europe that has not been seen in the modern era, and we need to make sure they know that Canada stands with them more than our wishes and photo ops with the Prime Minister showing up in Ukraine. We need to give them all the support they've asked for, which includes, and that's the request from Ukraine.
And Mr. Poilievre, if I could just play off of that, you say no, and yet it's the very thing that the Ukrainian government has asked for over and over again, the no-fly zone.
Right. The reason is that if we bring in a no-fly zone, it could very quickly escalate to Canada being in a war with Russia. And I'm not standing on the stage today promising to declare that war. I'm making the responsible position that will provide the material support necessary that we can as Canadians, both to the population and to those fighting against Russians, but also do what we can strategically to provide Europe with an alternative source of energy so that the Europeans no longer have to fund Russia's war with machine by buying all of its oil and gas.
Thank you very much, both of you. Next question, Mr. Baber, it goes to you. Way back in the 1970s, you may not be able to remember that, but nevertheless, ancient history. But Pierre Trudeau brought in supply management, basically a state-run system to manage dairy and poultry industries in this country, setting huge tariffs for foreign products and in the process inflating prices here at home. Do you support the current supply management system? Yes or no?
No, there's no free country when you have centrally planned economy. Instead of protecting supply management and central Politburo planning, we should not cap how much dairy Canadians may produce. It's utter nonsense. I oppose supply management.
Mr. Charest.
I fully support supply management. I always have. And in this era of supply chains that are disrupted, this is, in fact, a policy that guarantees us access to food that we need. So I unequivocally support supply management.
No, I don't. In fact, supply management costs the average Canadian family about $600 a year. I think it's important in an affordability crisis that we actually help Canadians make food cheaper to eat. That's the problem with supply management. It's costing too much for Canadians.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Yes, the party has a history of supporting supply management, but I think it's fair in this affordability crisis to have a broader consultation with our membership.
Mr. Poilievre.
I do support supply management. The alternative would be to buy out the quota, and that would cost 10, 20, 30 billion dollars, and that would have to be done through a tax on consumers, which could be more expensive than the alternative. We should lower food costs by getting rid of the carbon tax and other taxes that are driving up the cost of food.
Mr. Aitchison and, I'm sorry, Dr. Lewis, my apologies. Supply management.
I do support supply management. Our dairy and egg producers give us superior products. Without supply management, our industry would be overrun by U.S. producers. I prefer to have a superior product that we'll pay a little bit more for, and if we want to bring down the price, cut the carbon tax.
Okay. I'm going to ask Mr. Baber and you, Dr. Lewis, because you hold opposing views on this. Mr. Baber, why don't you tell Dr. Lewis exactly why it is that we should not have supply management, and perhaps, as the critics of your position would say, put those industries into jeopardy?
So one of the themes today is cost of living. At a time when cost of living is so high, visit a grocery store. Life is becoming unaffordable. Why not to increase more supply instead of telling farmers how much milk they can produce? We should encourage the creation of more goods, especially if we're worried about inflation. But I support a gradual phasing out of supply management because, yes, we do have quotas and we have concessions that people bought. We have to provide them with some ease down, but we should not cap how much Canadians can produce.
Okay. And Dr. Lewis, critics of your position might say, what is a conservative doing supporting the policies of Pierre Trudeau on a state-imposed mechanism?
Well, from a free market perspective, supply management, of course, is not a free market ideology. However, we have to ensure that we support our farmers, and we have to ensure that Canadians get the best product on their table. If we want to cut costs, we can cut the carbon tax, and that is what is bringing up the cost of food for Canadians.
Thank you very much, both of you. Mr. Charest, you get the first swing at this next question. As we've seen in the United States in the last couple of weeks, there are no laws around abortion. Abortion is only allowed by the Supreme Court decision known as Roe versus Wade. And courts, as we are seeing, can change their minds. In Canada, we don't have any laws either on this. We depend on the Morgentaler case, which essentially decided that it was not illegal. So the question is this: would you support legislation around abortion?
I am pro-choice, and my government would not bring in legislation or support legislation to change or to restrain the rights of women. The situation we have now is what we should maintain, and that is a very clear. They're all candidates except one on this stage has stated their position on this.
Mr. Aitchison.
I will always defend a woman's right to her personal reproductive health choices, period. Always.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brown.
I'm pro-choice. I support a woman's right to choose, and any government that I lead would not revisit this issue.
Mr. Poilievre.
A Poilievre government would not introduce or pass legislation restricting abortion.
Dr. Lewis.
I am pro-life, and women in Canada can have an abortion up until 9 months. And so there is no restriction on abortion. What we need to do is have conversations about what we believe in,
Thanks.
what we
we're out
agree
of
on.
time. Mr. Baber.
I don't believe that government has a role in how people start and grow their families. If as conservatives want to stay out of people's lives, then we should stay out of the most intimate areas of their lives. But that doesn't mean that we don't respect parliamentary democracy, that we gag our MPs, that we don't allow people to contest nomination. I'm wondering how all my friends feel about others in caucus who have different views.
Okay. Let's just further explore this a little bit. Mr. Charest, I want to start with you, and Mr. Aitchison, I want to bring you into the conversation as well. You say, everybody interpreted the question of a law around abortion as restricting it. What if it was a law enshrining it?
Well, it's not what's anticipated. I mean, it's clearly not the case. But on this issue, can we be clear on one thing? Every candidate in this race needs to tell the women of Canada where they stand, whether they're pro or against. The women of Canada deserve to know where they stand. And Mr. Poilievre's answer, quite frankly, does not fit that test.
Okay. We will be taking 10 seconds away from Mr. Poilievre, but Mr. Aitchison, get in.
I think that it's nonsense.
Yeah, Mr. Aitchison, please go ahead.
I think it's important for us to always be respectful of each other. There are really strong views and deeply held beliefs on this issue. And this is one of the problems that I see in our party today. We've become factions, and we don't listen to each other and respect each other as we debate ideas and differing opinions. Then Canadians will never trust us. And so this to me is about respect, and really I don't see a lot of that, unfortunately, on this issue.
Right, thank you very much. Next question, Mr. Aitchison, we're going to start with you. Last year, Canada took in more immigrants than at any other time in our history, doubling the usual number of about 250,000, and we're planning to increase that number even more. So looking at the latest numbers of around just over 400,000, is 400,000 or a little bit more the right number to be bringing in every year into Canada?
Well, this much I know: we need more Canadians. We need more workers. We need more skilled workers in our economy. It's one of the reasons we have a housing shortage in this country. We need 200,000 skilled tradespeople in this country today. So we need more workers. Whether 400,000 is the precise number or not, it should be targeted, though.
Mr. Brown.
No, it's not enough. We're not meeting our skilled labor shortage, not even close. And the backlog right now under Justin Trudeau, under the current Prime Minister, is the largest it's been in Canadian history. He's not properly resourcing our immigration department. It's been an abysmal failure.
Mr. Poilievre.
We need the workforce, frankly, but when we bring immigrants here, we need to make sure they have the freedom to own a home by getting rid of the gatekeepers that prevent housing construction, and the freedom to work in their field by getting rid of the gatekeepers that prevent them from getting licenses in their professions and trades. So I will get rid of those gatekeepers and give them that opportunity.
Dr. Lewis.
The issue is not about quantity, it's about quality. We need to make sure that we bring immigrants here who can contribute to our society. I came here when I was 5 years old, and we need a compassionate immigration system that will have jobs for people.
All right, thank you. Mr. Baber.
I'm an immigrant to Canada, and I had every blessing our country has to offer. And I think that Canada's multiculturalism is beautiful. We have an aging demographic, a shrinking labor force. We need to encourage lawful immigration. Democracy and opportunity is why immigrants come to Canada. Those are conservative values.
Thank you. Mr. Charest.
400,000 may be within the right zone, but it is very much dependent on our ability to integrate people. And how do we integrate? We integrate through a job. We integrate through language. We integrate by allowing people to integrate into communities. And credentials is one of the key elements to integrate Canadians.
Let's pick that up. Mr. Brown, I want to just explore a little bit more of your thinking. 400,000, 405,000, it's a record number for this country, but should it be 500,000, 600,000? We know that we've got a labor shortage. What's the right number?
You know, I was speaking to a friend of mine, Joseph Mancinelli, who's the head of LEUNA Canada, and he told me today, just today, they're short 30,000 workers. And these are in the skilled trades, great jobs, good paying jobs. And you could change the education system, but that takes, 10 years in terms of creating a new stream of workers in the skilled trades. We need that immigration. We need that talent right now. There are jobs that they can't build, houses we can't build, bridges we can't build because of the lack of labor. We need to unleash the Canadian economic potential through immigration.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next question now. Mr. Brown, this goes to you, actually. In 2014, at a NATO summit in Wales, the Canadian government, led then by then Prime Minister Stephen Harper, promised to spend 2% of our GDP on national defense. Since then, as you know, we haven't even come close. With a war on Europe's doorstep right now, and with our vast northern regions now vulnerable, would you meet the pledge of 2% that is our NATO commitment?
Yes, absolutely. Frankly, we're not taken seriously on a world stage when we can't even meet the obligations that we've committed to. And it's not just about a peacekeeping role abroad, it's about our own sovereignty, the Arctic. And so 100%.
Mr. Poilievre.
We need to work towards hitting that goal. And we need also to make sure the money we spent gets results. Right now, too much of the procurement of equipment is tied up in politics and political favoritism. That's why billions of dollars have wasted, and products are not delivered to the front line for our soldiers, sailors, and airmen. So not only will we increase it, we will spend it well.
Unfortunately, we have not invested enough in our military. Yes, I would commit to meeting that 2%. Right now, we are underfunded, and that is one of the reasons why we have not been able to supply the needs that Ukraine could use to assist them.
Mr. Baber.
Yes, we need to increase our defense spending by 50% in order to meet our NATO commitment. If we're going to ask men and women in uniform to risk their lives, then they must have the best equipment and the best training. But I believe that our defense policy should be limited to safeguarding our country and meeting our treaty commitments.
Thanks very much. Mr. Charest.
Well, the answer is yes. This is an issue of sovereignty for Canada, and I put out a defense policy that's very detailed. One thing that I think we need to do urgently is assume our sovereignty in the Arctic. And I would open 2 bases in the Arctic, one with a deep sea water port to defend our sovereignty against Russia in particular.
Mr. Aitchison.
Yes. The sad reality of this is that our military procurement system has become a joke in the world, and we waste money, and we don't have the right equipment for our men and women in service. And our partners, our allies, are making new alliances without us because we're not a reliable partner.
Mr. Poilievre, I just want to dig a little bit deeper into your answer. You said that we should work towards it, so not necessarily meeting it. But as you know, this is one of the main irritants in Canada-U.S. relations, regardless of the administration. When you say work towards it, have you got a time frame in mind as to when we get to 2%?
Look, it will take a progressive move because it's roughly an extra $14 or $15 billion a year. If you up the budget in 1 year, well, then you're going to have a bunch of bureaucrats at the Defense Department trying to shovel the cash out the door without getting proper results. In fact, they can't spend the budgets they have right now and get results. So I will increase it as fast as we possibly can within the confines of our costed budget, and towards putting those dollars into getting results for our soldiers, sailors, and airmen.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Baber, I want to come back to you on this because you have a slightly different view as to what we should be doing.
Yeah, I think that Canada's credibility in the world is eroded right now because some countries don't believe we're an actual democracy anymore. And so we need to focus on resolving our issues at home while increasing our NATO commitment, to meet our NATO commitment, and that's about 50%. But we should not go beyond our treaty commitments at this point. I appreciate the role that Canada played traditionally in peacekeeping, but now it's time for other countries to step up and take the lead. God knows we have enough problems at home at this moment.
Thank you all very much. We're going to go to the final question now. It's Mr. Poilievre. Mr. Poilievre, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission presented its final report in 2015. That is 7 years ago, and it contained 94 recommendations. Would you make a commitment to implementing all 94 recommendations?
I can't make the commitment to 100% of the recommendations, but what I can is to address the structural unfairness that leads to the injustice, and that is fundamentally in the Indian Act. We have to give First Nations communities control of their money, their land, and their resources. That is the only way that they will be able to have prosperity and paychecks for their people.
Dr. Lewis.
We need to make sure that First Nations people are at the table where the decisions are being made. And we also need to make sure that we keep our promises. We have been promising year after year clean water on reserves, and we have not delivered. If we cannot deliver on simple promises.
We have to be honest and learn our history so we don't repeat it. But dividing Canadians is actually hurting reconciliation. The best thing we can do for reconciliation is to improve the lives of Indigenous peoples.
Thank you. And Mr. Charest, just in case people forgot the question, is would you commit to the 94 recommendations in the Truth and Reconciliation report?
Well, the 94 recommendations, you can't commit to all of them. But Tom, Indigenous Canadians deserve respect, and a lot better than virtue signaling and false promises. They should be part of our resource economy. They should own equity. And I would put together a crown corporation that would allow them to own equity.
Okay. Dr. Lewis, I just want to come back to you because I didn't hear whether you were going to support all 94 recommendations, but can you tell me if you're not going to support all?
I didn't get a chance.
Oh, I didn't know you were here. I'm terribly sorry. I'm terribly sorry.
Don't, he's going to take time away from me. Stop.
No, yeah. Mr. Acheson, my apologies, please.
My answer is yes, I would. But I would also make sure we eliminate all boil water advisors. I would expedite the installation of broadband internet. And my approach to reconciliation is a journey, but it will be about fewer conferences in Ottawa and more action on the ground.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brown.
Yes, having a strong collaborative relationship with Indigenous communities will be essential if we are committed to building pipelines in this country. We need to have that strong collaboration. We need to get pipelines built. We need to create prosperity in Indigenous communities and across the country.
Okay, and I just want to bring you and Dr. Lewis in because there was just one thing I didn't quite understand. Would you, Dr. Lewis, implement all 94 recommendations?
I will implement any recommendation that uplifts the lives of Indigenous people. We have let them down, even our missing and murdered Aboriginal women. We have not committed to even dealing with that issue, which is a fundamental issue that affects the core of the society on reserves.
Okay, Mr. Brown, if we don't implement all 94, what ones would we not implement of the 94? Choose one that you would not implement.
Well, my answer was that I would support the recommendation. So I said yes, and I believe it's integral for us to have that strong collaboration if we're going to have the joint prosperity through the construction of a national energy corridor and pipelines. I just don't see how you can build partnerships with Indigenous communities to get pipelines built if you ignore the recommendations that are so important to Indigenous communities across the country.
Thank you all very much on that. That ends this section of the spontaneous yes or no answers. We are now moving towards what we call the lightning round. Now, let me explain. You have been informed of this. Believe it or not, there are Canadians who don't know you guys and Dr. Lewis yet. So this is a chance just to get to know a little bit about who you are and character and likes, dislikes, and that sort of thing. I'm going to ask everybody the same question. We're just going to go down the line. Everybody gets a chance. It's a very fast answer. You'll see that these things are, you got 15 seconds to answer this, and we're going to be starting with Mr. Charest. And Mr. Charest, the very first question I have for you is, what book are you reading now? What book are you reading now?
Oh, I was reading the most recent book that I've been reading has been about Russia, and I forget the title right now, but it's been about Russia.
Very good. Mr. Aitchison.
I'm actually reading a book that Dennis Mills, former member of Parliament for Toronto Danforth, gave me on water.
Do you remember the title?
Called Water.
Oh, it's called Water.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and would you like to know what it's about?
Okay.
It's about water.
Yeah, I get it.
It's about the future of water and the importance of water in geopolitical issues. Anyhow.
Mr. Brown, what are you reading these days?
Well, I'd say on a leadership campaign, let's be honest, there's no time to be laying around reading books. But historically, I've loved, legal novels, the John Grisham books. Growing up, I loved Horatio Alger, the rags to riches stories, which is, our Canadian dream.
Mr. Polyev, what are you having time to read these days?
Well, Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules, great book, and a lot of good lessons. We all need to improve ourselves, and I think he has a lot of good wisdom in that book that could help anybody.
Dr. Lewis.
Shackleton's Way, it's about sacrificial leadership. It's about lending yourself to service for others and being a leader that people can admire and aspire to.
Thank you, Mr. Baber.
It's been difficult since the leadership started, but before that, a friend suggested that I read David and Goliath. And that's been a theme that throughout our campaign, we continue to exceed expectations. Sometimes people might surprise you and you might have an unlikely result.
Mr. Aitchison, I wanted to ask you and give everybody a chance. There's a question and there's a twist to the answer. I want to know who your political hero is, and you cannot say Winston Churchill.
Prime Minister Diefenbaker. Prime Minister Diefenbaker, he was a tremendous orator. He brought us the Bill of Rights. He was an amazing Canadian who defended Canadians' freedoms and enshrined them in law.
Correct. Mr. Brown.
Absolutely. Former Premier Bill Davis. I felt he radiated decency. I learned more from him than anyone else. He lived only a few doors down from me in Brampton, Ontario. And I think his legacy is one that is enormous in our country.
Mr. Polyev.
Well, Wilfrid Laurier. He opened up the West to immigration. It brought many of my ancestors here. Though he was a Catholic, he made a point of reading a Protestant Bible so he could understand the other side. He said that he used to pick fights with the Scottish boys and flirt with the Scottish girls and managed to bring all the Canadian nations together into this wonderful country we call Canada based on the principle of freedom.
Thank you. Dr. Lewis.
Point of clarification, did it have to be Canadian? I didn't hear.
Just your political hero, as long as it's not Winston Churchill.
William Wilberforce. He spent his life fighting for the abolition of slavery, even though he never knew whether or not he would see that materialize. But he had convictions to stand up for what he believed in, and he did not matter if it sacrificed his political career.
Thanks very much. Mr. Baber.
Margaret Thatcher. We will either stand on principles or we will not stand at all. She was not afraid of making difficult decisions. She stood up to the radical left-wing mob. This is something that I hope we're going to restore to the Conservative Party of Canada. Courage to say what we believe and do what we believe is right.
Mr. Charest.
Darcy McGee, born in Ireland, went to the United States, chose to come to Canada, renounced Irish nationalism and gave his life for his country because he was assassinated, one of the only political assassinations in the country, by Fenians.
Thank you all very much. That was actually really interesting to hear all that. Dr. Lewis, I'm going to start with you, and then of course everybody else gets a chance. I know you're all busy. I know that you've got stuff that you're doing right now, but when you have the opportunity to sit down and listen to some music, what do you listen to?
I would say probably jazz is my go-to.
Who's your favorite jazz artist?
Coltrane.
Cool. Okay. Mr. Baber.
Amy Winehouse. When I hear Amy Winehouse, I can see into her soul. She speaks to issues of addiction and mental health, something that people know that I'm very, very passionate about. And she left us too early. Yeah, Amy Winehouse, Back to Black.
Okay. Mr. Charest.
Well, for jazz, Pat Metheny, but my family and I are also great lovers of Charles Aznavour.
There we go. Mr. Aitchison.
Well, I play the piano, so I love to listen to Oscar Peterson. But since my assistant Parker has been driving around with me, I'm starting to listen to a little more country music. So I'm learning a bit more about that.
Okay. Mr. Brown.
Well, I think I have to say Alessia Cara, because I'm from Brampton, and Alessia Cara is our most famous musician right now. And but I should also say MIA. We're trying to get them for our Canada Day party. A great story of overcoming adversity.
Terrific. And Mr. Polyev.
Well, pick a local hero, Paul Brandt, Alberta Brown. You got to let them applaud that, Tom. Come on.
Okay. I'll allow the applause because it's for Paul Brandt. Okay.
You'll have to take it off his time.
Yeah, I'll take it off his time. Yeah. Mr. Brown, I want to start with you. What do you think is, and remember 15 seconds, okay? What do you think is the single biggest threat to Canada today?
Our financial chaos right now. We're $1.2 trillion in debt. And if you allow the finances to get out of control of the country, you lose all capacity to deal with the challenges in your country. 1.2 trillion, $2 billion a month in interest.
Thank you very much. Mr. Polyev.
Well, I would build on that. It's not just the 1.2 trillion federal, but the other $1+ trillion provincial, and then the other $7 trillion of private debt that is about to collide with higher interest rates. The government and the central bank have set us up for a massive debt crisis, and we don't have time to avoid it.
Thank you. Dr. Lewis.
I think our declining democracy, people have lost trust and confidence in our democracy. The invocation of the Emergency Measures Act and freezing of people's accounts without a court order has led people to question our institutions, such as the media and our political institutions.
Thank you. Mr. Baber.
100% with Dr. Lewis. The erosion of our democracy is the greatest threat to Canada right now. Government is passing law to censor speech. Millions of Canadians are treated like second-class citizens. State-funded media bailouts and state-funded media, an unlawful declaration of the Emergency Act.
Okay.
I'm going to defend Canada's democracy.
Right. Mr. Charest, the single greatest threat to Canada is?
Well, it is national unity. The greatest mistake we all could make as Canadians is to take this country for granted. And of all the things you've named on this stage, colleagues, none of them can be addressed unless there is a national conservative government that includes Alberta at the table. That's what is the most important threat, our national unity.
Mr. Aitchison.
And I'll build on that. I think the greatest threat to Canada right now is division. It's our political rhetoric and a political system that's designed to divide us to win votes. It's short-sighted and doesn't build a country up at all. And I think it's dividing our country.
Thank you all very much. I want to go to a question maybe a little more lighthearted, getting to know you a little bit more. And there are a lot of people who want to know this. It's not just me, trust me. But Mr. Baber, what was the last thing that you binge watched on TV?
Married with Children. I was at the cottage, and that was some time ago. I learned the English language watching Married with Children with subtitles. It's a great tool for new Canadians to learn English. Watch a good TV show.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Charest.
It was a French series that was absolutely fantastic because it speaks to the relationships. C'est Appelle mon agent, call my agent in English. It was absolutely spectacular.
I like that one too.
Yeah.
Mr. Aitchison.
My parliamentary colleague, Eric Malillo, got me hooked on Brooklyn Nine-Nine while we were doing French immersion in Quebec.
Mr. Brown, yeah.
normally if I have free time, I love watching hockey, no surprise there. But my wife got me into Ozark and we binge watched it, and I'm told there's a new season out right now and I'm too busy to watch it. So I'm in trouble with my wife. We'll have to watch it without me.
I've seen the final season and I won't tell you how it ends, but you can imagine. Mr. Polyev.
Well, I think it was Netflix had a series on Trotsky, actually. And it helped me to better understand the diabolical evil of communism and totalitarian socialism. But this bright side is it helped me appreciate the freedom that we have in Canada that we have to stand up for and defend.
Thanks very much. Dr. Lewis.
Bridgerton. And what I loved about that is that it was a different era, and people did not see race. They just existed and coexisted. And it was very beautiful because I also watched it in French and also improved my French.
Okay, excellent. Thank you all very much. We've got one question left, and then we're going to go back to some other stuff. But this is a good one, and Mr. Polyev, I'm going to throw this one to you. What historical figure from any time, anywhere, would you most like to have dinner with?
Abraham Lincoln. I think through principle and courage, he saved the American Union and ended slavery. He did so at great, obviously, ultimate personal sacrifice with his eventual assassination. But he had an incredible brain that he taught himself as an autodidact, coming from humble beginnings as a working class person.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis.
Nelson Mandela, he existed at a time when his country was divided, torn apart by racial hatred, and yet he fought against it. He was able to overcome and bring people together.
Mr. Baber.
Ronald Reagan. He opposed one of the greatest evils of the 20th century, opposed the radical left and communism, and did it with grace and with courage. And we need to be resolute in the face of all those that would seek to erode our democracy. I admire him very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Charest.
I'm a great fan of the partnership of Sir John A. Macdonald and Georges-Étienne Cartier. And my son and I wrote a chapter in a book about Georges-Étienne Cartier, who showed extraordinary resilience, promoted property rights, and was one of those who allowed this country to actually come to be.
You know, Sir John A. would probably stick you with the bill for that dinner, but that's another thing altogether. Mr. Aitchison.
Mine is actually Nelson Mandela as well. He's a hero. How he brought South Africa together and ended apartheid is nothing short of miraculous and incredible.
Final word to you, Mr. Brown. Dinner.
Well, I'll agree with Mr. Charest. John A. Macdonald. I resent the cancel culture we're seeing on great figures who built our country, and the adversity, the challenges of uniting our country, building Canada. That would be a fascinating dinner.
Sorry, I'll figure this out by the end of the debate, my microphone. Thank you all very much. That was fascinating. I know it was a weird little journey to go on, but I think it was interesting. We are now moving on to the next segment of the debate, which is called Face Off. And before we start that, I'd like to bring Emma up, who is going to give you all a prop. And I'll explain to everybody what this is all about. So as we are handing these out, this, in a way, is the segment that you've all been waiting for, when the candidates can choose who they want to debate on any particular issue. And here's the way it's going to work. I'll introduce the topic of the debate to a candidate. Not the question, just the topic. And then you decide, you tell the audience who you want to debate this with. Once you've chosen your opponent, I will then tell you what the question is. There will be 3 rounds of the person you have chosen to debate. The first round, each person gets a minute each. The second round, you get 45 seconds each. The third round, you get 30 seconds each. Now, this is where it gets interesting and why you have the prop in your hand. After we've done the 3 rounds between the 2 people, anybody else can enter this by simply raising your paddle. And you will have a guaranteed 30 seconds to put your 30 seconds in with. Here's the trick. There are 6 questions, and you can only use your paddle 5 times. You can use it all on one question if you want, or you can use it wherever you think you have the greatest advantage. So there is some strategy involved here. I wish you good luck with this. Now, unless there are any questions, we are going to start. And question number one. Mr. Poilievre, the topic is law, order, and blockades. Who would you like to debate?
Patrick Brown.
Patrick Brown. Okay. Here then, Mr. Poilievre, is the question. And remember, you have 1 minute in the first round to say your piece. We've seen over the past few years blockades at our borders, blockades on rail lines, blockades of construction, blockades at logging sites, and a blockade and an occupation of our capital city. Law enforcement experts say we will likely encounter more and more of this as the years progress. How do you decide when a protest becomes a threat to our national security and our national economy? And would you outlaw any protest that disables critical infrastructure, and that includes our cities?
And that includes?
Our cities.
I believe that blocking critical infrastructure should be illegal. And that's why before the truckers even arrived on Parliament Hill, I said I supported their peaceful and law-abiding efforts to restore their liberties and their livelihoods while condemning any individuals who broke laws, blocked critical infrastructure, or behaved badly. That's what individual responsibility actually means. Now, I just find it interesting that you didn't include in your list of threats the axe-wielding terrorists who've been attacking our pipeline workers in Western Canada. I don't know why that doesn't seem to be a trouble to you, but or the rest of the national media, because you're more concerned about truckers who lost their jobs because of an unfair vaccine mandate imposed on them by a prime minister who was targeting them without any scientific basis than you were about holding accountable people who've actually done violence and most recently just set the car on fire of someone who was investing in the energy sector.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, you have 1 minute.
Tom, I don't support illegal blockades, whether it's at the Ambassador Bridge, whether it's against a pipeline. I think Conservatives need to stand for law and order, full stop, and illegal blockades have a massive cost on the country. You look at the cost when there was the blockade on the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor. I was just visiting Mayor Drew Dilkins in Windsor just last week, and he was talking about how it affected their economy, Ontario's economy, Canada's economy. And I think Conservatives are the party of law and order, and we can't give exceptions to that. Full stop, no illegal blockades.
You haven't used your full time, but if you want to give it back, that's fine. We could always use it.
Well, in terms of law and order, I would just add that there are areas that the Conservative Party have not focused on enough in Parliament. I look at bail reform. You know, I see it in the GTA. There is a giant loophole in our criminal justice system, and you've got frequent flyers. Literally the same people getting arrested and released again and again, and there's a cost to public safety with that.
Mr. Poilievre, you have 45 seconds.
Well, there is, and there's also a cost to the approach taken by Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Charest. They both believe in targeting law-abiding people who use firearms responsibly after having been vetted, licensed, and are already in possession of a license and training. Charest went after them with a long gun registry in Quebec. Trudeau wants to spend $1 billion targeting these same people. That money that Charest and Trudeau spent going after law-abiding people could have been spent reinforcing border security to stop the 80% of gun crimes that actually come in through smuggling and and we could also, instead of going after the lawful, target the criminals who would do the crimes with mandatory prison sentences to take them off our streets.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, 45.
You know what? We do have a huge problem at our border, and I get briefings almost on a weekly basis by the chief of police in Peel, and we've had meetings with all the chiefs of police in the GTA to talk about smuggled firearms. 90% of our homicides last year in Peel were from firearms smuggled across the border, and we need a government of Canada that would take that seriously. Criminal organizations are becoming more sophisticated than ever before in terms of getting firearms into our country using new technology. And we need to actually listen to our law enforcement. You know, in Ottawa, we have a government that announces photo ops and press releases when it comes to firearm policy. They're not listening to law enforcement, and we desperately need them to.
Mr. Poilievre, 30 seconds.
Remember, the state needs to be under the law. And what Trudeau is now doing is unlawful censorship. C-11 is an attempt by him to give his bureaucrats the power to control what you see and say online, and to take down things that he doesn't agree with. That is not lawful. That is not democratic. I will repeal those laws, and I will restore the freedom of speech as a principle for the federal government, and also bring financial penalties to universities that shut down open and free debate on campuses.
And Mr. Brown, 30 seconds to you.
I would just add that when it comes to firearm legislation in this country, we have bad legislation on top of bad legislation, and we've got a government that is missing the mark. One of the reasons we've had a proliferation of gun and gang violence, where there's no respect for postal codes and jurisdictions, is there isn't a concerted national approach. Under Prime Minister Harper, there were serious consequences. We understood that we had to draw a line when it came to gun crime in our country, and we need the same strict approach again.
Thank you very much, the two of you. Mr. Charest, you're first up, and anybody else, if you want to get in, just raise your paddle. Mr. Charest, 30
Thank
seconds.
you. And since I've been brought into this debate, let me start by pointing out that Mr. Poilievre is very conveniently rewriting history tonight. The fact of the matter is, he did support illegal blockades. We all admit that this was a mess created by Mr. Trudeau, unnecessary, a total mess. But I disagree with anyone who has a privileged position of making laws supporting illegal blockades that have cost us millions of jobs and cost us investment in this country.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Baber and then Dr. Lewis.
This is a good opportunity to set the record straight. Everything that Justin Trudeau said about the protests in Ottawa turned out to be false. There was no foreign collusion.
That's right.
There was very little foreign funding. The arson was not connected, and there were no weapons found anywhere near the site. And on February 18th, we saw, as the government was breaking the rule of law with an unlawful declaration of emergencies, the protesters remained peaceful. There was no resistance, no assaults. And on February 18th, we saw this was a truly peaceful movement.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. Go ahead.
I think we're missing the point about the illegal blockades. If elected officials had just listened to the truckers, they would not have been there that long. In addition, the vulnerability that Canadians face knowing that Big Brother can go into their account and freeze their account without a court order, that has set our democracy into a declining state. We need to uphold our Charter of Rights. We need to uphold our freedoms and ensure that governments never do that again.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to get in on this? Going. You want? Okay, Mr. Baber, second chance.
I just want to talk about an important issue. My first law job was at a community legal clinic where I picked up a lot of compassion and love for people. Far too often, our criminal justice system criminalizes addiction and mental health. I'll come down hard on sex offenders, on gun violence and traffickers, but imposing strict criminal penalty for possession does nothing to deter drug addiction or heal addiction. We have a mental health and addictions catastrophe in our country, and we need a justice system that recognizes it and offers Canadians a treatment and a way out.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Poilievre.
I think Dr. Lewis raised an excellent point about the government's abuse of the Emergency Act to freeze bank accounts. Well, now there's a proposal to create a central bank digital currency, which would involve people depositing their accounts, their money, with the government itself. This gives massive new powers for surveillance, control, and censorship, and gives the state far too much control over our money. And that's why I would ban a central bank digital currency and give people back control of their money from bankers and politicians.
Dr. Lewis.
Mr. Poilievre encouraged people to buy Bitcoin, which is a digital currency. So I'm quite surprised that he is saying now that he would ban digital currency, as if he does not know that Bitcoin is a digital currency. He also encouraged people to cash in their fiat currency, their paper money, and buy Bitcoin. If they had done that, they would have lost $37,000 by the time he had said that, to do that to today. So I'm very concerned about that.
Mr. Poilievre.
Well, that's just false. One, Bitcoin is not a central bank digital currency. It is obviously not. It's not controlled by any central bank anywhere in the world. Two, people can make their own investment decisions. I've simply said they should be free to decide whether or not they want to use Bitcoin. I don't want to be like communist China and ban Bitcoin or other technologies, because in a free market, people should have the opportunity to make those decisions for themselves. That's my position.
Thank you very much. Are we done? No, Dr. Lewis, one more time.
In fact, Mr. Poliver said that you could hedge against inflation, which is not true. So Mr. Poliver is promoting a decentralized currency over his own government's currency. That is a problem for someone who held a shadow cabinet position as a finance minister.
Sorry, Mr. Charest and then Mr. Brown.
Well, on Bitcoin, I mean, everyone just finds it totally bizarre what Mr. Poliev is suggesting. We all get it on blockchain, that's fine. Bitcoin has lost 60% of its value since November of last year, 20% in the last month. Anyone following his advice that we saw on YouTube would have lost 20% of their earnings. Do you actually think your parents enjoy having your parents lose 20% of their retirement funds? I mean, this is lunacy, and it doesn't make sense at all.
Mr. Brown.
I have to agree with Dr. Lewis and Mr. Charest. I disagree with Mr. Poliev's approach that you can opt out of inflation with cryptocurrency. Magic internet money fluctuates vastly, 30% or more in one day. And the last thing we should be doing is encouraging our parents and grandparents, along with vulnerable families, to gamble their savings, their retirements in something this risky that's been learned watching late night YouTube videos.
Mr. Poliev.
Well, Mr. Brown, that's not what I said. You're misleading the public. I clearly stated that people should have the freedom. Now, the reason why many people have chosen to exercise that freedom is because central banks have been attacking the value of our national currencies by printing $400 billion here in Canada, leading to 30-year highs in inflation, doubling the house prices, leading to massive volatility in many sectors of our economy. And that risk is one I pointed out earlier on and could lead to another debt crisis. So frankly, we should protect the value of our traditional money rather than banning private money.
Mr. Brown, you're up.
So Mr. Poliev just said that he didn't say that. No one in this room and no one in Canada will believe that you didn't say you can opt out of inflation through cryptocurrency. That is misleading. Your words are there. You can Google it yourself and watch it on the internet. And I have to say, it is bad advice to be giving to Canadians that is so risky. And you should know that. As a former finance critic, that's not the advice you should be giving to the country.
And Mr. Poliev, you raised your paddle for one more time.
Mr. Brown, if you want to talk about risks to people's finances, you were the one who said, you promised when you ran for the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, you would oppose a carbon tax. And then as soon as you got in, you reversed yourself entirely. Not only did you endorse just any carbon tax, you endorsed the carbon tax of Justin Trudeau, which is in place today and recently increased and is one of the reasons why prices are so high across this country. That is a threat to our money. That is a decision you made after you promised not to. People can't believe a word you said.
Mr. Bever.
I can't believe that you have a bunch of politicians here, career politicians, giving people investment advice. Let's distinguish the issue, okay? There's digital currency controlled by government that has government friction potentially and compromises their privacy. And then there's investment decisions that people make. Human ingenuity is great. We should encourage research and development and diversified portfolios. But we should behave like conservatives again and not tell people what they should and should invest in. Maybe we should oppose supply management. Maybe we should oppose equalization. We should not be afraid of being who we are. Enough.
Mr. Baber, that's great. Are we all done? Okay. I do remind you, you've only got 5. So talking about bank accounts. I don't know, but somebody over there does. And they will tell me, and I will tell you. All of this conversation, though, leads neatly to my next question. And the topic is the future of the party. Mr. Charest, who would you like to debate on the future of the party?
Mr. Poliev.
Mr. Poliev, there we go. The question, the leadership campaign, this leadership campaign has been particularly vicious on a personal level. We've seen that. We've heard candidates call each other liars, accuse others of having no integrity. One of you even says it sounds like a kindergarten class. There are also deep divisions on a lot of policy issues, from abortion to zero emissions. The conservative movement has split before in the recent past. We know that. So the question to you, Mr. Charest and Mr. Poliev, how do you make room in the conservative tent for all those who hold opposing views to yours? How does the party enter the next election? How can the party enter the next election united? Mr. Charest, you have 1
Tom,
minute.
this is for all those listening to us tonight and in the room, this is the key question. They know, everyone knows that the Trudeau government needs to get out of office, and they're looking to the Conservative Party of Canada as the national alternative. And the question they're asking themselves is this: are you up to the task? Are you, yes or no, going to be a national conservative alternative and party? That's our challenge, ladies and gentlemen. And what is that party? It's based on core values that we all agree on: fiscal conservatism, a market-based economy, economic policies that promote economic growth, including oil, gas, pipelines, and mining. Families also, all sorts of families, plus respecting the rule of law, a foundation of our society. There is no freedom if you do not respect the rule of law. There is no freedom. And it includes a federalism that conservatives practice, that includes Alberta, includes Ontario, Quebec, that actually makes this country work.
Mr. Poilievre, you have 1 minute.
We need to unite the party around freedom. Social conservatives want the freedom to raise their kids with their own values and preach their faith without censorship. Fiscal conservatives want the freedom to make their own financial decisions, control their own money, including without excessive taxes or carbon taxes. Rural conservatives want the freedom to own and control their own property. Progressive conservatives want for women, minorities, First Nations to have the freedom to make their own decisions without discrimination. Libertarian conservatives want freedom of speech, freedom to make their own decisions online, and freedom to speak without the government censoring them. So when we unite the party along that consistent principle of freedom, then we bring all the various parts of our party together, and we electrify and excite a new generation of young people that I've been bringing into the coalition so that we can form the next government and beat Justin Trudeau.
Mr. Charest, you have 45 seconds.
I want to be very clear. I'm not running as a hyphenated conservative, ladies and gentlemen. We've had enough. We'll leave that to the Trudeau and the left to hyphenate everyone. I am not a hyphenated conservative. I am a conservative, period. You know what values I espoused and practiced all my life. And once we are rallied around those values and we're together, you also know that we will respect those who don't agree with us, who may have different views. And Mr. Poilievre talked about social conservatives. Let's talk about that. He still won't tell you his position of whether he is pro-choice or pro-life. I respect social conservatives. They will always have a place in our party. They are good people, faith-based people who deserve a place at the table and in the family.
Mr. Poilievre, 45.
Well, I believe in freedom of choice on that issue. I already said that at the very beginning. So I don't know what you missed. I don't know if you were listening. Yes, it is. That's what I said. But Mr. Charest, why didn't you take a moment to acknowledge that you're the only one on this stage who actually voted for a law that would recriminalize abortion when you were part of the Mulroney government? You did. And you can take a moment now to renounce your earlier vote if you've changed your mind, but that was your position. You seem to have forgotten it. You've forgotten a lot of things about your record. You forgot that you brought in a carbon tax. You forgot that you raised the fuel tax, the sales tax, the health tax. You forgot that you banned natural gas development in your own province. You forgot you brought in a long gun registry. You seem a little bit forgetful about your record, Mr. Charest, but Canadians now remember.
Hang on. No. You know, you guys know the rules. You know the consequences. Mr. Charest, 30 seconds.
I am very proud of my record as a conservative that stands on its own merits, on fiscal conservatism, on reducing the size of government, reducing taxes, which I did when I was premier, by the way. Quebecers had $1 billion less taxes paid and higher disposable income after I finished in government, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, Mr. Poilievre, thank you for at least now telling us that you are pro-choice. We understand that's what you're saying tonight. Please confirm that for us.
And Mr. Poilievre, you have 30 seconds.
I did confirm my position that I will not introduce any law on abortion as Prime Minister. I made that very clear. But Mr. Charest, you're wrong about your tax record. You raised the sales tax, the carbon tax, the fuel tax. Just like Patrick Brown, you're trying to flip-flop on it and say one thing on the stage different than what you said before. And the overall tax burden in Quebec went from 19% of the economy to 25% of the economy under your government. That is your record. You can't run away from it. I have a clear, solid record as a tax cutter that leaves more money in people's pockets.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, you have 30 seconds.
First of all, Pierre Poilievre just ran on a carbon tax and knocked on doors in Carleton literally 6 months ago, literally in the last election. Now, but let's talk about the future of the party. The future of the party, we have to win where we've lost. We've lost in suburban Canada. And I don't see us winning any new seats. Actually, I see us losing seats if we run on the same discriminatory policies that Pierre Poilievre's had a history of supporting. We must be the party that celebrates and supports religious freedom, not tramples it. Full stop.
Thanks very much. Dr. Lewis.
Well, Mr. Poilievre said that no pro-life bill will pass in his caucus, but he believes in freedom. Are you going to give your MPs the freedom to vote their conscience on issues of life?
Am I allowed to answer?
If you use your paddle, you can. That's
Well, he's been silent on the issue. So
okay. Mr. Poilievre, you've raised your paddle. You have 30 seconds.
I do believe in free votes. So there's your direct answer. And as for Mr. Brown, sorry, Patrick, you told the members of the Conservative Party in Ontario that you were against a carbon tax. Then you flip-flop and embraced a carbon tax. You said that you were a pro-life social conservative. And then after you became leader, you said that social conservatives were intolerant dinosaurs. You said that you would get rid of the sex ed program in Ontario, and then you embraced it. You now attack all the Harper government policies that you enthusiastically supported and embraced when you were part of his caucus.
Thank
Nobody
you, Mr.
can believe the words
Is
you
anybody
say.
else wanting to get involved in this? Mr. Aitchison, 30 seconds.
Well, I appreciate everybody talking about the importance of, all the different types of conservatives. I think Mr. Poilievre gave us a great list of all the different types of conservatives. And it is important for us to respect each other and have respectful dialogue. But it's not enough just to unite conservatives. We need to win over swing voters, people who aren't part of our party. And I think that's going to be extremely difficult, especially if they watch some of the nastiness on this stage tonight.
Sorry, Mr. Baber.
I'll unite the party by restoring democracy in the Conservative Party, but most importantly, bring back disillusioned voters. Our party failed to stand up for many Canadians against lockdowns, against mandates, until the truckers came to town. Many Canadians felt that we've abandoned them, so they voted for another party, or they didn't vote at all, and now they're disillusioned with our party. I'm the only one on the stage who stood up for Canadians for 2 years, for a year and a half before it was popular, and I'll bring back disillusioned voters. We cannot win if we're not united right of center.
Anybody else? Dr. Lewis?
Mr. Baber was not the only one who stood up for Canadians who lost their jobs due to mandates, who were discriminated against, who cannot fly. I also stood up for those Canadians, and I wanted to make that point.
And Mr. Brown, I believe you've got one left.
Okay. Well, let me be very clear. I was one of the only big city mayors in the country that didn't impose vaccine mandates. No firefighter, no police officer, no long-term city employee lost their job in Brampton. I stood by the right to have personal health choices. And I have to say, it's surprising during the leadership campaign that all of a sudden Pierre Poilievre comes out against mandates, because in the heat of the battle, he didn't say a word. He was hiding in his basement at a time that I had longtime municipal employees in Ottawa calling me, asking for help. I give Roman Baber credit. He was there. He was heard. Dr. Lewis was heard. Disappeared.
Thanks very much. It would seem appropriate for me at this point, and I'm getting the information in my ear, but I want to pass it on. Mr. Brown, you've got one intervention left. Mr. Poilievre, you're out. You've used your 5. Dr. Lewis, so have you. I'm waiting to hear. Mr. Baber, you've got 4. Oh, you've got 1 left, Mr. Baber. Mr. Charest, you've got 3 left. Oh, good, you're keeping count. And you've got 4 left. Is everybody clear on what you've got and what you don't? Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Lewis, this next question is for you, and the topic is energy. And who would you like to debate?
I'll debate Mr. Aitchison.
Mr. Aitchison and Dr. Lewis. Excellent. Here's the question for both of you, starting with Dr. Lewis. Oil and gas, as we know, in Canada has seen a price rebound in this year, but the export growth of these commodities has been constrained by pipeline infrastructure. You've all said that you would boost the building of pipelines. There are multiple jurisdictions, as we know, that need to be involved in that process. So the question is this: how would you do this? Who would pay for these pipelines, and how would you deal with indigenous or provincial opposition? Dr. Lewis.
Investing in Canadian oil and gas is the best way to grow our economy. We can enter into agreements with indigenous populations that will actually enrich those populations. And many of those agreements have been entered into, and it has been beneficial in uplifting those populations. We also need to ensure that we eliminate Bill C-69 and Bill C-48, which is really crippling our local capacity to develop our oil and gas. We have to get our products to market, build pipelines. We could go through Churchill and get our products to Tidewater and offset dictatorship oil.
You haven't used all your time, but if you're conceding it, I'll go to you, Mr. Aitchison, for 1 minute.
Well, I mean, I think it's safe to say that everybody on this stage is pro-pipeline, but we do need a real plan. You know, Mr. Poilievre talks about the gatekeepers in the federal bureaucracy, and of course there are a lot there. And so probably the first thing I would do as leader of the party and as the Prime Minister is I'd make Pierre Poilievre my Minister of Natural Resources to deal with the gatekeepers and solve that problem. Gatekeepers he can fire. Second, we need to create a framework that allows more building. Clear and concise rules. We need clear guidelines, timely approvals, set timelines on these things, and get the process moving and make sure it's not delayed. We must simplify and speed up this process, stop dithering, and provide certainty. This is one of the biggest challenges that we face. Investment doesn't like uncertainty. And this is part of the problem we face here is uncertainty. We need to make it clear, concise, and put timelines on it. And I think Pierre would be perfect at that.
Dr. Lewis, you have 45 seconds.
I think it was very short-sighted for us not to invest in pipelines, and we're seeing the implications of that now. In Europe, 40% of all the oil that's purchased is purchased from Russia. We're actually financing the war between Ukraine and Russia by not getting our products to offset dictatorship oil. Every day we import 555,000 barrels of oil. We have the third largest accessible oil reserves on the planet, which we are leaving untapped. It is a great resource that we could use to rebuild our economy, develop our infrastructure. For every job that's created from the oil and gas sector, 7 splinter jobs are created across the country. This could help us out of the recession.
Mr. Aitchison, to you for 45.
Yeah, I would also add that, of course, I think we all agree that one of the reasons we're also pro-pipeline is because Canada's energy is the answer to a lot of problems in this world today. I mean, we see what's going on in Ukraine right now. In Canada, we don't even have the capacity to scale up to help countries like Ukraine and countries like Germany and Europe because we're not ready. We haven't been doing the work. We have had a liberal government that's just gotten in the way and made things more difficult every step of the way. It's good for our economy. It's good for our environment, and it's good for advancing foreign policy. Canadian energy is some of the cleanest in the world. People don't realize that Fort Mac has reduced their carbon output from their production by over 30%. That's incredible. I guarantee you Venezuela's not doing that.
Dr. Lewis, back to you for 30, and I just underlined part of the question, which is who pays for this?
I'm sorry?
Part of the question is who pays for this?
Well, if we are building pipelines and we are selling our products and we're getting our products to market, we will have enough resources that we can reinvest back into our economy and actually improve the lives of certain regions. Even in the north, we could invest in improving those individuals' lives and making sure that we build critical infrastructures in the north, bring down the cost of fuel, assist with the high cost of food, and cancel the carbon tax.
Thank you, Mr. Aitchison. 30 seconds left for you.
And you're asking me who pays for the pipelines?
Yeah.
Yeah, industry should pay for the pipelines. There's no question about that. And if there is certainty in the process and there's certainty in the system, they're more than happy to make those investments. But it is the industry that should be doing it.
Terrific. Anybody else want to get involved in this discussion? Going, gone. Well, I think only 2 of you have battles left, so let's move on to the next one. And Mr. Aitchison, this is a question to you, and the topic is the North. Who do you choose to debate?
Mr. Baber.
Mr. Baber it is. Okay, and here's the question, Mr. Aitchison. The largest part of our land land mass in this country is north of where most Canadians live. And while incredibly beautiful, as we all know, the North is struggling economically, demographically, and now with melting ice, its very security may be at risk as hostile nations move to take advantage of that area. One could argue that the North is our biggest challenge, but it's also our biggest opportunity. So, what is your vision for the North?
My vision of the North includes actually engaging in the North. I think Mr. Charest made a very good point about making sure we have not just one, but two deep water ports in the North. You're quite correct that ice is melting, and there are other nations that are cruising through our northern waters and not all that interested in what we think about it. We need to defend the North, we need to engage with the North, and we need to be making investments in the North. But that includes, of course, our military commitments. We need to be making sure that we're not just committing 2% of GDP on military spending to meet our NATO commitments, but we also need to be making sure we're meeting commitments to protect Canada. And it's not just enough to be protecting the East and the West Coast. We have a North Coast, and it's been neglected, and we need to invest more there. And so I fundamentally think that this is about engaging all parts of our country and making sure that we can secure it at every port, at every coast.
Thank you. Mr. Baber, for 1 minute.
Thank you. The best way to help northern communities is to unlock their natural resources potential, and not just oil and gas. I'm very interested in mining. There's an insatiable appetite right now around the world for precious metals and precious minerals, and Canada and the North are blessed with them. And we can do this. We can strike the right balance. We can consult stakeholders, and we can protect the environment. But we need to end this resistance to the development of natural resources. And northern communities are going to be the greatest beneficiaries of that. That also means we'll improve infrastructure and build roads and highways in the North. Let's bring northern communities a true economic opportunity. Let's build roads. Let's start building and working in our country again. Let's get back to work.
Mr. Aitchison, back to you for 45.
I think speaking about the North also provides an opportunity to talk about housing, which is an issue that has not come up in this debate yet. And it's a crisis in this country, and it's particularly a crisis in the North. And we need to commit as a federal government, not just to ensure that big cities and southern Canada is getting things built, but we need to make sure that we make a commitment to the North as well, because the housing situation there is as much of a crisis or worse than anywhere else in Canada. And so housing would be a crucial investment to make sure that we're engaged and making sure that the health of residents in northern Canada is sound.
Mr. Baber?
I want good paying jobs in the North. I had a gentleman approach me a couple of months ago who I didn't know, and he told me that his company owned a mining permit for 15 years, and they weren't able to go ahead because local stakeholders would not consult. I know that the Supreme Court recognized that there's a duty to consult, but it doesn't mean that we can't strike a balance. We can be reasonable again. Let's mitigate environmental risk. Let's agree on profit sharing, but I will not allow to hold up the development of Canada's natural resources. We need them for the well-being of our northern communities, and most importantly, we need them to get out of the fiscal mess that the Liberal government is leaving us in.
Mr. Aitchison, you have 30.
Some debate between Roman and I think we were agreeing on almost everything here, and I think that's kind of nice. I don't really have much more to add on the issue. I think that there's been a lot of talk over the years about engaging in the North, and not a lot of action. I think that's pretty typical of this Liberal government. We've seen, when it comes to housing, lots of photo ops, but not a lot of ribbon cuttings. And I think that's disgusting, and we need to do better. And Conservatives are a party of action. And so we will get these things done, and we will engage with the North and actually do it.
Mr. Polyev.
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is a very complicated show. Okay, Mr. Baber, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate my friend Scott for his kindness and for his gracious approach to this race. Perhaps it will give me an opportunity to politely respond to Dr. Lewis. I'm the only one on the stage that opposed lockdowns. I was removed from the Doug Ford caucus in January 2021 when I spoke up about the collateral harm that we're causing our health and mental health by way of locking down healthy people instead of a focused approach against a very transmissible virus. But I appreciate that she joined against mandates subsequent to the last general election. Thank you.
Mr. Charest, did you raise your paddle or did?
May I respond since it's...
No, if you I'm sorry. No, you can't. Mr. Charest, go ahead.
Well, thank you. And Scott and Roman have both said things that I totally agree with. And thank you for a very constructive discussion on the North, to which I want to add. Yes, I would build 2 military bases in the North, one with a deep water port. This is one of the most important issues facing our country. And this is a good city to talk about it. Edmonton has a very deep connection to the North. But it also includes affirming our sovereignty. It includes things like icebreakers, unarmed icebreakers, submarines that we also need to build to be able to patrol the North. It includes solidifying our agreement with the Americans on NORAD.
We're done. Anybody else want to? No? Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. Thank you very much. Mr. Baber, this is for you. The subject is cost of living, and who would you like to debate?
Mr. Charest.
Mr. Charest and Mr. Baber on this question. We have seen a rapid rise in the cost of living for Canadians at levels we haven't seen in 40 years. And we are certainly not alone. Every Western country is going through this right now. Under your leadership, is there anything a Canadian government can do to reverse the worldwide trend without making the wealth gap any larger in Canada than it already is today?
So I think it's important that we acknowledge the cause of inflation and the rising prices. It's not just the $500 billion in debt that we printed in the last 2 years. It's lockdowns, something no one on the stage other than myself was willing to acknowledge. We stopped the global supply chain at its tracks numerous times and then restarted demand again. Supply is not catching up to demand. The best thing we can do right now is to provide the market with some certainty. I will never allow for any lockdowns or any stoppages. I'm also going to restore discipline to government. We're spending way beyond our means, but in terms of affordability, I'm going to repeal the carbon tax on day one. And I will cut income taxes across the board with money saved from equalization payments. I would rather that Canadians spend them instead of provincial governments. We are the Conservative government. We should not be afraid to be talking about cutting taxes.
Mr. Baber, thank you. Mr. Charest.
Well, Roman, on the issue of lockdowns, and I agree, I think one of the things we need to do if we don't want to have the lockdowns and the restrictions we had the last time is change our healthcare system so that we have capacity. That's one of the reasons why Canada had more restrictions than anywhere else in the world, because we don't. So we need to open up this healthcare system so there's more flexibility, more private sector participation in this. On inflation, we need to reduce spending, and we also need to, I think, reduce the income tax load of Canadians. I did that during the Great Recession, and we had a better performance than Ontario, Canada, the United States, or Europe. Lower unemployment and stronger economic growth. Those are the things that we can do to increase the disposable income of people, which is exactly what happened after I was premier. The disposable income, especially of lower income people, increased substantially because we reduced taxes and controlled spending.
Thanks very much. Mr. Baber, you have 45.
We should never lock down, Mr. Charest, no matter what the circumstances are. We have to acknowledge the toll that this took on people. A mental health pandemic. In Ontario alone, more than 300,000 surgeries were delayed. More than 1 million cancer screenings missed. The whole point is that the toll on our health was considerably greater. Instead, we should have been protecting vulnerable populations, beefing up our resources in congregate settings where 80% of the risk was. We should have been increasing the healthcare capacity we had, but we should acknowledge lockdowns, the effect on our children, the effect on small business. This is something that we cannot escape, and we need to think about and resolve going long term.
Well, and you know, we agree that we need to avoid the lockdowns, and that's why I would change the Canada Health Act. I'd introduce a new act because Canada's issue has been capacity. We're the country in the world who's had that problem, capacity to be able to absorb people. But let me also talk about something else in relation to inflation. Mr. Poilievre's suggestion of firing the governor of the Bank of Canada, his suggestion that of saying that the Bank of Canada is financially illiterate is irresponsible. It creates doubt. If you're an investor looking at coming to Canada and you hear that kind of a statement coming from a member of the House of Commons, you'd think you're in a third world country. We cannot afford to have any leader who goes out there and deliberately undermines the confidence in institutions. Conservatives do not do that.
Mr. Baber, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the cost of living. The political class is out of touch with Canadians. Prices for produce, for instance, have tripled. This may be one of the greatest challenges that Canadians are facing right now, and we need to do everything possible to make life more affordable for them, not more expensive. Let's repeal the carbon tax. It's increasing the price on everything. Let's cut the income tax, and let's stop devaluing the loonie.
Mr. Shurey.
Well, on the carbon tax, I agree with Roman that we need to get out and repeal the Trudeau carbon tax on consumers. And I would be inspired by Alberta. Here in Alberta, since 2002, and you renewed this in 2019, there is a price on carbon for large emitters. And let me point something out here. This is extremely important to get it right. Otherwise, we will not be elected as a political party if we're not credible on this, A. B, we will not get investment unless there is a predictable investment environment on an issue like pricing carbon.
Thank you. That round is finished. Would anybody else like to join in? Mr. Brown, you've still got points, as do you.
We don't have
Mr.
any
Aitchison?
more points.
No, I know you're out. Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, we are now going to move on to the next question. Then, Mr. Brown, the issue is climate change. Who would you like to debate?
My friend, Dr. Leslyn Lewis.
Okay, Dr. Lewis and Patrick Brown. Mr. Brown, here's the question. In 2015, almost every country in the world, including Canada, signed onto the Paris Accords to fight climate change. To date, not a single G20 country is on track to meet that obligation. Should the Paris Agreement still be the benchmark for Canada in measuring itself by, and if yes, would you commit to meeting the initial Paris Agreement by 2030, and who will bear the cost of getting us there?
So first of all, I should say that the Liberals promised Canada to targets they have no intention, no plan to meet. And that's part of the problem. We need to have a credible environmental plan to actually achieve the targets that Canada commits to. I don't believe in Canada committing to targets that we're unable to commit. And frankly, it is photo op environmentalism. How is it better for the environment to be importing foreign dictator oil into Canada? I find it infuriating that I can't use, when I fill up the pump in Brampton, Ontario, I can't use and be a wealth generator for the Canadian energy sector. And I have to say, the fact that our Prime Minister, this Prime Minister, doesn't understand that is a huge toll on our economy. It's costing Canadians more. Looking at the latest stats, 73,000 barrels from Saudi Arabia, a loss to our economies. He hasn't invested into our energy corridor 14 billion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Brown. Dr. Lewis.
Canada signed on to the Paris Accord. They didn't meet their targets. The US pulled out of the Paris Accord. They met their targets under Donald Trump. The issue is not whether or not we sign on to the Paris Accord. The issue is the resolve to make sure that we leave the future for future generations better environment than what we inherited. There is no partisanship in the environment. We must work together to make sure that we are protecting the environment. The carbon tax doesn't reduce emissions, it just increases revenues. We need to ensure that we adopt technology that will bring down emissions, that will increase conservation. And we have to have a credible environmental plan. And that plan has to have a component of education to change the way we interact with the environment.
Mr. Brown, 45 seconds.
Yes. So you look at China, one of the greatest polluters in the world, 30% of the global emissions. To help with environment, we need to export clean Canadian energy to the world. Since 2014, 18 LNG projects, none approved. At the same time in the US, 7 were built, and now they have 22% of the global market share. So the question about helping countries reliant on coal have clean Canadian energy should be how Canada could help abroad. And right now, we need a conservative government that can get pipelines built. And the reality is there's some candidates on this stage who would have no chance to get pipelines built because of derogatory remarks they've made about Indigenous Canadians.
Dr. Lewis.
Well, that person certain. I know that Mr. Brown does not refer to me on that one. So it is very important that we look at the entire life cycle of a product. So even when we commit to something like net zero, we should not be virtue signaling to use the environment as virtue signaling. We have to ensure that we look at the entire life cycle of a product. So even if we have a green product, we have to look at the entire production from the start to the finish, such as green energy, such as green cars, electric cars. What is the entire product?
Mr. Brown, you have 30.
So if the premise to get pipelines built is Indigenous collaboration, I'd have to ask Pierre Poilievre the question how he believes he could ever get a single pipeline built in this country when on the heels of Prime Minister Harper's historic residential school apology, he attacked in a disgusting manner Indigenous Canadians, saying they lacked work ethic. Someone who attacks Indigenous partners who we require to build pipelines will never be able to build a single pipeline in this country.
And Dr. Lewis, you have the last 30 seconds.
I just wanted to expand on my comment about the entire life cycle. I'm very concerned with things like electric vehicles, that we do not consider the fact that it starts off in poor countries, in some African countries where children as young as 5 years old are working in cobalt mines. So when we think of protecting the environment, we must think of the entire impact, the entire life cycle.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to say anything? Mr. Charest.
Well, this is a key issue for us. We need to do a lot of things, including carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, blue, green, biofuels, small modular reactors. Alberta, Ontario, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan are working together to develop those technologies. Replace the carbon tax of Mr. Trudeau with something similar to what Alberta is doing for large emitters, and have a credible policy on this in the next campaign, ladies and gentlemen. Otherwise, our government will not be elected.
Mr. Aitchison.
Thank you. I actually would propose a similar plan to what former Prime Minister Harper had in 2008. It's similar to what Mr. Charest has proposed in this campaign. In fact, I'm making my cabinet right here as we go. I'd make him Minister of the Environment, probably. And I think we need to offer a balanced regulatory approach. I do agree with taxing the large industrial emitters. But I think it's important to point out what's going on right here in Alberta. The innovative work going on in the economy here is something that we need to take an opportunity to sell our products to the world to help countries like China reduce their emissions.
I think that's it. And I see no more paddles being raised. I just want to say that you have been also incredibly disciplined with your time, that we find ourselves in the lovely position of me being able to offer some time back to all of you. Throughout this debate, no doubt you have been dying to say something about what has been discussed here today. So I want to go down the line, and we'll just take it in geographical order here, starting with Dr. Lewis, and go down the line. 30 seconds to say anything that you have wanted to say that you didn't get to say so far. 30 seconds each. Dr. Lewis, up to you.
I wanted to add on my point for the environment that we can protect the environment without punishing average Canadians. Every time they're filling up their gas tanks, they're heating their homes, they're putting food on the table, they're being punished with the carbon tax. I would cancel the carbon tax.
Thank you very much. Mr. Baber.
First of all, I really enjoyed today's debate, and of course I appreciate the tone. I think it's okay to have a little bit of fun as we did last time around. And also I think that we should encourage people to speak more freely. A lot of candidates may wish to respond to one another. We should perhaps accommodate such opportunity. And finally, if I may, in the 10 seconds they'll give me, I think that we should not be afraid to stand for what we believe is the Conservative Party. And unfortunately, I'm out of time.
You're out of time. Mr. Charest.
I look forward to working with everyone on stage here, and Mr. Aitchison, I appreciate the invitation. I want to talk about resources and point something out here about Canada. We have a knowledge-based economy, but a good part of our exports are resources. Whether it's mining, oil, gas, whether it's pipelines, we need to stand up for the development of our resource industry. And we need a prime minister who's actually going to say this is a good idea. We can do this and transition to zero emissions in 2050. It is possible to do it. And only the Conservative Party of Canada has the ability to offer that leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Charest. Mr. Aitchison, what have you been dying to say?
Well, I guess I really think it's important to say that as Conservatives, we need to have the courage of our convictions to defend our values and our principles. Our values and principles as Conservatives are timeless. And if we stick to those, and if we offer a principled, consistent message to Canadians, we can form the next government.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brown.
I believe in technology, not taxes. And Brampton will be the first big city in Canada to have a fully electrified transit fleet, clean, green, and no emissions. I should also say, we need to have a conversation about a carbon tariff at the border. The fact that some candidates on the stage are okay to allow India and China to flood the market where they have no environmental standards, they have no labor standards, and compete with Canadian goods is wrong. We need to create a Canadian advantage and protect against product being dumped with no environmental cost.
Thank you very much. Mr. Poilievre.
The biggest issue I've heard about that people haven't talked about today is housing. Our 32, 33-year-old people living in their parents' basements. We have the fewest houses in Canada per capita in the G7. At the same time, our central bank has been printing money to inflate prices. The solution is, of course, to fire the gatekeepers. I've already announced that I will fire the governor of the central bank to get inflation under control, but I will also tie infrastructure dollars for cities to the number of houses they allow to get built by removing the red tape and allowing builders to build homes for our young people to live in.
Thank you very much. We are now going to the final section of the debate. And once again, all the candidates have been advised in advance of this. And it is simply we started the debate with the question, what is my vision for Canada is ... This question is, why should I be the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada ... 45 seconds to each of you to answer that question. And we are going to start with Scott Aitchison.
I believe it's 30 seconds. Is it not?
We've increased it to 45.
Really?
Yeah.
I got my 45 back. We must welcome more people to our party if we are to succeed, but we cannot do it with angry rhetoric and attacks on each other. Leaders always engage, empower, and inspire the team around them. As leader, I will bring Conservatives together, and we will earn the trust of all Canadians to govern again. I know our best days lie ahead. With our team focused on all that unites us, we will fulfill the promise of a brighter tomorrow. And if you seek a Conservative government focused on making life more affordable, join me. Join me at votescott.ca. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aitchison. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Tom. I want to be leader of the Conservative Party of Canada because we need a leader who can defeat Justin Trudeau, not just yell at him. We need to expand our party with new members, new supporters, new volunteers, and most importantly, new voters. But it'll never happen if we choose a leader who repels voters and supports failed, election-losing policies that trample over the religious freedom of Canadians. I won in the GTA by proving to voters who have traditionally not supported the Conservative Party that their values are our values, Conservative values. With your support, we can do that on a national scale from coast to coast to coast and win.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. We are now going to Dr. Lewis, 45 seconds.
Are we not doing Mr. Poilievre? No? Oh, me? Okay.
We drew for these slots, and you drew number 3, so
Thank you.
there you go.
Canadians are tired of legacy politicians that will say anything to get elected. Wokeism and cancel culture are robbing people of their voices. Our Charter of Rights needs to be defended. As your leader, I pledge to work tirelessly to heal our institutions and win back the trust of Canadians. But I can't do it alone. I hope you will join this movement to restore our declining democracy and return prosperity to Canada, because only then will we remain glorious and free.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. And Mr. Charest.
Thank you, Tom. There are millions of Canadians who are orphans in this country right now. They're political orphans, and they are looking for a national alternative and a conservative alternative. We need to be that party. I want to lead that party. I want to unite the party, and I want to offer a national vision, not based on anger, not based on tearing down institutions, but on building our country. We are the most privileged citizens in the world. We won the lottery of citizenship. We should be living up to that aspiration, passing on to our children the country that we received from our parents. It is your responsibility and mine to do that. And as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, I will give you a national majority government.
Thank you, Mr. Charest. Mr. Poilievre.
People feel like they've lost control of their lives. Elderly people who have to choose between heating and eating. Single moms who can no longer afford sporting for their kids. Full of grown adults stuck in their parents' basement, not able to start a family or build home equity for the future. Inflation out of control at a 30-year high, and a government that instead of hearing these concerns tries to censor them by cracking down on the population. I'm running for Prime Minister to put you back in control of your life by making Canada the freest nation on earth, by removing the gatekeepers so that we can build more homes for our young people, unleash opportunity for our energy workers, reduce our energy costs so everyone can go where they want and heat their home. Make this the country that is the freest on earth so you can take back control of your life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. And final word goes to Roman Baber.
Thank you. My name is Roman Baber. I was born in a communist regime, and I'm very scared for what is happening to Canada's democracy. And I'm running to become Prime Minister so I can defend Canada's democracy. With me, what you hear is what you get. For the last 2 years, I've been staying here trying to defend Canadians because I'm not afraid to say what I believe. I'm not afraid of cancel culture or the left-wing lockdown mob. I love Canada and I love Canadians. And you can always count on me to defend you and your family. No matter how hard it gets, you will always know where I stand. I ask that you become eligible to vote at joinroman.ca and that you rank me #1. Thank you so much for welcoming all of us tonight.
Thank you, candidates, very much. It was a challenging format, but I think that we did well. I just want everybody to know that you will all be, we're getting the band back together again on May 25th in Laval, Quebec for the French debate. You can all tune into that as well. On behalf of myself, I just want to thank all of you for a superb debate tonight, an exchange of ideas. As I said, good, passionate debate is the lifeblood of good democracy. Thank you all very much, ladies and gentlemen. That is tonight's debate.